The scrabble of claws against loose rock echoed through the canyon. Max, a battle-scarred German shepherd, clung to the crumbling edge of the 200-foot cliff, his powerful muscles trembling with exhaustion. His amber eyes, once bright with the courage that had saved countless lives, now widened with primal fear. One paw slipped, then another. A desperate whimper, almost human in its terror, pierced the thin mountain air as more rocks gave way beneath him. Time seemed to slow as Max's body began its descent, his silhouette small against the vast, unforgiving wall of stone. The canyon below waited in silent, stone-cold indifference. The fall took less than 4 seconds, but in those moments, life and death engaged in a negotiation that defied all odds. What followed would become a testament to the unbreakable bond between humans and the animals they love. A 38-day battle that would divide a town, drain fortunes, and ultimately remind a broken community what it means to fight for something beyond reason or calculation. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Max wasn't just any German shepherd. At 7 years old, his muscular frame carried the quiet dignity of a veteran. A retired search and rescue dog with 27 successful missions to his name. His coat, mostly black with tan markings along his chest and face, bore a few gray hairs around his muzzle, testament to the lives he'd touched and the disasters he'd faced. Before the fall, those alert ears could detect a whimper beneath rubble that no human equipment could find. James Wilson never went anywhere without Max. The 65-year-old retired police officer had dedicated 40 years to the Pine Ridge Police Department before hanging up his badge last spring. Losing his wife Martha to cancer 6 months ago had hollowed him out, left him with only Max, his family. Their morning hikes through the Rocky Mountain trails had become both ritual and therapy, the only moments when the weight of widowhood seemed to lift from James's stooped shoulders. The town of Pine Ridge, Colorado, sat nestled between unforgiving peaks, a community of 3,000 souls where everyone knew everyone's business. It was the kind of place where neighbors still brought casseroles during hard times, but also where opinions divided sharply and grudges could last generations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell wasn't born in Pine Ridge. She'd moved to town 5 years ago, opening a veterinary practice that quickly gained a reputation for taking cases others deemed hopeless. At 42, with prematurely silver-streaked brown hair and perpetually tired eyes, she'd developed a quiet stubbornness that both irritated and impressed the locals. Her clinic, a renovated farmhouse on the edge of town, had become a last resort for desperate pet owners. Kyle Roberts knew these mountains better than most. The 28-year-old wilderness guide had grown up exploring every canyon and trail in the region. With sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, he made his living introducing tourists to the beauty he'd always taken for granted. Few knew that 3 years ago, during the worst flooding Pine Ridge had seen in decades, it was Max who had trapped and found Kyle trapped under a fallen tree, saving his life. Eleanor Daniels lived alone in the largest house in Pine Ridge, a 70-year-old widow whose wealth came from a late husband's insurance business. Known for her designer clothes and pearl necklaces even at the grocery store, few suspected the financial troubles lurking behind her carefully maintained facade. The morning had begun like any other for James and Max. A cool spring breeze carried the scent of pine through the mountain air as they set out on their favorite trail, Widow's Peak, named for its distinctive silhouette against the morning sky. James had packed light: water, trail mix, and a worn photograph of Martha that he'd taken to showing to the empty space beside him at scenic overlooks, as if she were still there to appreciate the view. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Max?" James murmured, his weathered hand resting on the dog's solid shoulder. Max responded with a soft woof, his tail sweeping in wide, contented arcs. These moments of connection had become James's lifeline since Martha's passing, the simple understanding between man and dog filling some small portion of the vast emptiness she'd left behind. The weather turned with the cruel suddenness typical of the Rockies. Dark clouds gathered over distant peaks, then raced toward them with alarming speed. James checked his watch and frowned. The forecast had promised clear skies until evening. "Looks like we'd better head back, boy." The first lightning strike hit a pine not 50 yards ahead, splitting the ancient tree with a thunderous crack. Max, who'd weathered gunfire during police training without flinching, bolted at the sound, his primal instincts overriding years of discipline. One moment he was there, the next a black and tan blur disappearing into the underbrush. "Max!" James called, his voice nearly swallowed by the sudden downpour. "Max!" The rain turned to hail, pelting his unprotected head as he stumbled along the rapidly muddying trail, calling for his companion with increasing desperation. That night James trudged back to his empty house alone, soaked to the skin and hoarse from shouting. He left the porch light on and Max's food bowl filled, a futile gesture of hope. By morning the storm had passed. James was back on the mountain before dawn, armed with Max's favorite squeaky toy and a backpack full of beef jerky treats. By nightfall, he'd covered 15 miles of trails with nothing to show for it but mud-caked boots and a growing hollow in his chest. Day 2 brought more of the same. James printed 50 missing dog flyers at the local copy shop, his hands trembling as he handed over the most recent photo of Max he could find. One taken at Martha's funeral, the German shepherd sitting solemnly beside his grieving master. "I'll put this on our community board," promised the shop owner, Sandy Miller. "That dog of yours has friends all over town." As James stapled flyers to telephone poles and bulletin boards, he felt the first stirrings of a terrible certainty. Max wouldn't have stayed away this long willingly. Something had happened, something bad. On the morning of the third day, Kyle Roberts led a group of tourists along Eagles Pass, a challenging trail that offered spectacular views of the canyon. The group rounded a bend, cameras ready for the promised vista, when Kyle spotted something moving on a ledge across the gorge. "Hold up, folks," he said, raising binoculars to his eyes. His heart sank as the image came into focus. A German shepherd pacing frantically on a narrow outcropping 100 feet below the cliff edge. Even from this distance, Kyle recognized the distinctive white patch on the chest. "Max!" Kyle's mind raced back to the flood, to lying trapped and half-submerged, certain he would die alone. He remembered the sound of Max's bark, the first sign that help had found him, the sensation of warm fur against his freezing hand. One phone call to emergency services, then another to James Wilson's number, which Kyle had memorized from the flyers all over town. "I've found him, sir. He's on a ledge in Broken Heart Canyon." Kyle tried to keep his voice steady. He must have fallen from the upper trail and gotten stuck. "I've called for help, but—" He hesitated. "It doesn't look good. The ledge is crumbling." James arrived as the rescue team was setting up ropes and harnesses at the cliff edge. His face, already gaunt from months of grief, seemed to have aged years in the past 3 days. When the team leader tried to hold him back, James fixed the younger man with the steely gaze that had once intimidated hardened criminals. "That's my dog," he said simply. "My family." Through binoculars, James watched as Max recognized him across the distance. The dog's ears perked forward, and he began to bark, shifting excitedly on the narrow ledge. "Stay still, boy," James whispered. "Please stay still." The rescue technician was halfway down the cliff face when it happened. Max, energized by the sight of his beloved master, moved too quickly. A section of the ledge crumbled beneath his back paws. For one terrible moment he hung suspended, front paws scrabbling for purchase on the remaining rock. Then he fell. The collective gasp from the onlookers was like a physical blow to James's chest. Through the binoculars, he watched his best friend tumble through open air, body twisting as if trying to right itself, before disappearing into the shadows of the canyon floor. "No," James said, the word barely audible. Then louder, No! Kyle was already moving, ignoring the shouts of the rescue team as he scrambled down a game trail that switched back toward the canyon floor. He didn't have proper gear. He didn't have authorization. He didn't care. 7 hours later, as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Kyle emerged from the canyon mouth with Max cradled in his arms. The dog's once proud body was broken, bloody, barely breathing. Kyle's face was streaked with tears and sweat, his clothes torn from the difficult ascent. "He's alive," Kyle said to the waiting paramedics and rescue team. "I found him wedged between two boulders. The snowdrift beneath him must have broken his fall." The drive to Dr. Mitchell's clinic was a blur of urgent voices and the quiet, desperate sound of James whispering to Max in the back of Kyle's truck. "Stay with me, boy, please. I can't lose you two." As they carried Max's limp form through the clinic doors, Dr. Mitchell's professional mask slipped for just a moment. Her eyes met James's, and in them was a truth neither wanted to acknowledge. Some miracles were too much to hope for. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's assessment was brutally honest. Her hands, steady from years of practice, moved methodically over Max's broken form as she cataloged his injuries aloud. The fluorescent lights of the examination room cast harsh shadows across her face, aging her beyond her years. Multiple fractures to the ribs and left hind leg, probable spinal damage at the lumbar region. Internal bleeding evident from the distension of the abdomen. Severe dehydration and exposure. Based on the pupils, likely concussion. She paused, her stethoscope pressed against Max's chest. James stood motionless in the corner, his tall frame seeming to fold in on itself. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed her assessment. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson," Dr. Mitchell finally said, removing her latex gloves with a clinical snap. "The kindest thing would be to end his suffering now. The extent of these injuries, even with surgery, the chance of meaningful recovery is virtually non-existent." James's mouth opened, but no words came out. After losing Martha, after the endless months of empty rooms and one-sided conversations, the thought of losing Max, too, seemed to physically crush the air from his lungs. It was Kyle who spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "You can't put him down. You can't." Mitchell's expression softened with sympathy but remained resolute. "I understand this is difficult, but—" "No, you don't understand," Kyle interrupted, stepping forward. His hands were still streaked with Max's blood from carrying him up from the canyon. "3 years ago, I was guiding a group when the Blackwater Dam broke. The flood caught us by surprise. Everyone got out except me. I was pinned under a fallen tree, half underwater with a broken radio. They sent search parties, but no one could find me." He swallowed hard. "No one except Max." Dr. Mitchell glanced down at the grievously injured dog on her table. "This dog tracked me through 2 miles of flooded forest, led the rescue team right to me. The water was rising. 10 more minutes and I would have drowned." Kyle's voice cracked. "I owe him my life. We have to at least try." Dr. Mitchell ran a hand through her hair, calculation and compassion warring in her expression. The surgery alone would cost thousands, not counting the rehabilitation, the specialized equipment, the medication. And still, the odds— "I'll pay for it," James said suddenly, his voice hoarse. "Whatever it costs." "James, your pension," Kyle began, knowing the retired officer's financial situation was precarious at best. "I don't care. I'll sell the house if I have to." James stepped forward and placed a trembling hand on Max's still form. "He's all I have left." Dr. Mitchell looked between the two men, then back at the broken animal before her. Against all professional judgment, she felt her resolve wavering. "I'll need to bring in specialists. Equipment we don't have here. There are no guarantees." "Just try," James whispered. "Please." The door to the examination room swung open, and Eleanor Daniels stepped in, still wearing her tennis club outfit, pearl necklace incongruous against her athletic wear. "News traveled fast in Pine Ridge." "I couldn't help overhearing," she said, her cultured voice filling the small room. "And I'd like to cover the medical expenses." Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Mrs. Daniels, we're talking about potentially tens of thousands of dollars." Eleanor's perfectly made-up face revealed nothing of the overdraft notices piling up on her desk at home or the increasingly urgent calls from her financial advisor. "I'm well aware of the cost, Doctor." That dog deserves a chance. What none of them knew was that Eleanor had been walking her own German Shepherd Baron the day Martha Wilson collapsed at the community park. It was Max who had barked frantically for help while James performed CPR on his wife. Eleanor had never forgotten the sight of that loyal dog standing guard, refusing to leave even as the paramedics worked. Baron had died of kidney failure just 3 months ago. Eleanor couldn't save him, but perhaps she could save Max. By morning, news of Max's fall and the effort to save him had spread throughout Pine Ridge. As Dr. Mitchell performed the first emergency surgery, a small crowd gathered outside the clinic, their opinions as divided as their backgrounds. "Awful lot of money to spend on a dog," muttered Frank Peterson, owner of the local hardware store, as he opened up shop across the street. "Money that could feed hungry people." "That dog saved Kyle Roberts during the flood and old Mrs. Tennyson during that gas leak at the senior center," countered Doris Wilkins, the town librarian. "He's earned whatever help he gets." Inside the clinic, Dr. Mitchell worked with grim determination. The first surgery, 8 hours of painstaking work to stop the internal bleeding and stabilize Max's condition, concluded with guarded optimism. "He survived the procedure," she told James, who had refused to leave the waiting room despite Kyle's offers to drive him home for rest. "The next 24 hours will be critical. If he makes it through the night, we can address the orthopedic issues." James nodded, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and unshed tears. Can I see him?" Dr. Mitchell hesitated, then relented. "Briefly, he's heavily sedated and on a ventilator." The sight of Max, intubated and surrounded by monitoring equipment, nearly broke James. The powerful animal who had bounded through mountain trails and pulled children from rushing waters now lay utterly still, his chest rising and falling only with mechanical assistance. James pulled a chair beside the kennel and sat heavily. After ensuring they were alone, he began to speak softly to his dog. "Martha would be so mad at me right now," he whispered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Remember how she always said you were too reckless for your own good, chasing squirrels too close to the edge?" His smile faded. "I need you to fight, Max. I can't say goodbye again, not yet." In the reception area, Marcus Green from the Pine Ridge Gazette was interviewing Kyle. At 32, Marcus had moved to Pine Ridge to care for his ailing mother and taken the local newspaper job temporarily. 3 years later, he was still there, finding meaning in telling the stories of the small community. "So you believe the dog will recover?" Marcus asked, pen poised over his notepad. Kyle ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. "I have to believe it. He's not just a dog. He's a symbol of something we need around here. Something we've been losing." "And what's that?" Marcus prompted. Kyle thought for a moment. The idea that some things are worth saving, no matter the cost, that loyalty should be repaid with loyalty. Marcus's article appeared in the next morning's edition. Local hero dog fights for life after cliff fall. The piece recounted Max's service record, the lives he'd saved, and the current effort to save his. It ended with Kyle's quote about loyalty. By noon, the story had been picked up by Denver news outlets. By evening, a national cable network had sent a field reporter to Pine Ridge. Dr. Mitchell found herself fielding calls from veterinary specialists around the country offering advice or assistance. The publicity brought unexpected consequences. A heated town council meeting erupted into shouting when the question of using the municipal emergency fund to support Max's care was raised. online comment sections filled with arguments about resource allocation and the value of animal lives. Through it all, Max clung to life with the same tenacity that had once led him through floodwaters to find Kyle. He survived the first night, then the second. On the third day after his fall, James arrived at the clinic to find Dr. Mitchell looking cautiously optimistic. "His latest blood work shows improvement," she said, leading James to the recovery area. "And this morning he showed response to pain stimuli in his hind legs, which suggests the spinal damage may not be as severe as we feared." James felt hope flicker for the first time since watching Max fall. "So, he might walk again?" "Let's take this one step at a time," Dr. Mitchell cautioned. "But yes, it's possible." When they reached Max's kennel, James was startled to see the dog's eyes open, cloudy with medication but undeniably aware. When Max's gaze found James, his tail thumped weakly against the blanket once, twice. It was a small movement, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to James it was everything, a promise, a connection, a reason to keep going. He knelt beside the kennel, pressing his forehead against the bars. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Welcome back." Outside the clinic, the crowd had grown, their divisions momentarily forgotten as word spread of Max's improvement. Even Frank Peterson stood among them, his weathered face thoughtful, as he watched Eleanor Daniels write another substantial check to Dr. Mitchell's receptionist. Something was shifting in Pine Ridge, something that went beyond the fate of one broken dog, a reckoning with what they valued and why. The days blended together in a rhythm of cautious hope and crushing setbacks. Dr. Mitchell's clinic, once a quiet outpost on the edge of town, now hummed with constant activity. Local volunteers staffed a makeshift reception desk to handle the influx of calls and visitors, while a rotation of veterinary specialists flew in from Denver, Salt Lake City, and beyond to consult on Max's case. On day 7, Dr. Mitchell performed a second surgery to repair Max's shattered left hind leg. The procedure lasted nearly 6 hours, with a veterinary orthopedic specialist guiding the placement of pins and an external fixator, a medieval-looking contraption of metal bars and wires that extended from Max's hip to paw. "It looks worse than it is," Dr. Mitchell assured James as she led him in to see Max post-surgery. "The external fixator actually reduces pain by keeping the bone fragments perfectly aligned while they heal." James nodded numbly, his eyes fixed on the metal framework protruding from his dog's leg. Max lay sedated, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, an IV line delivering fluids and pain medication to his battered body. "When can I take him home?" James asked, a question that had become his daily refrain. Dr. Mitchell's expression softened. "We're still looking at weeks, not days, James. His injuries are catastrophic. The fact that he's alive at all is—" She trailed off, unwilling to use the word miracle in a medical context, yet finding no better alternative. James understood what she couldn't say. He'd seen men survive impossible situations during his years on the force. Bullet wounds, car crashes, falls that should have been fatal. Sometimes science couldn't fully explain why one person lived while another died from seemingly less severe injuries. Sometimes it came down to will, and Max had will in abundance. "I'll stay," James said simply. He'd been sleeping in his truck in the clinic parking lot, washing up in the staff bathroom, eating from the diner across the street. His house sat empty, mail piling up on the doorstep. Dixon, Mitchell didn't bother arguing anymore. Instead, she had Kyle bring in a cot from his camping supplies, setting it up in the storage room adjacent to Max's recovery kennel. On day 9, Max ate his first solid food since the fall, a spoonful of pureed chicken that James fed him by hand. The entire staff gathered to watch, breaking into spontaneous applause when Max weakly licked his chops after swallowing. "Look at that appetite," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like when he was a pup. Remember when you ate my new work boots, you rascal?" He stroked Max's head gently, careful to avoid the bandaged area where an IV catheter was secured to his foreleg. That evening, Eleanor Daniels arrived with dinner for James and the overnight staff, containers of homemade beef stew and freshly baked rolls from her housekeeper. "How's our patient today?" she asked, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer clothes at odds with the clinical setting. James managed a tired smile. "He ate a little. Dr. Mitchell says his latest blood tests look better." Eleanor nodded approvingly, then hesitated, her manicured hand clutching her purse a little tighter than necessary. "I've been meaning to tell you. Max was special to me, too, you know." James looked up, surprised. He and Eleanor ran in different social circles in Pine Ridge. He had always viewed her as somewhat aloof, part of the country club set that had little to do with retired civil servants. "The day Martha collapsed at the park," Eleanor continued, her voice softening, "I was there with Baron, my German shepherd. Max was the one who alerted everyone that something was wrong. The way he barked for help, stayed by her side." She swallowed hard. "Baron passed 3 months ago. Kidney failure. Nothing to be done." James reached out and awkwardly patted Eleanor's hand. "I'm sorry about Baron." "Well," Eleanor said, straightening her shoulders, "that's why this matters. Dogs like Max and Baron, they're family. They deserve every chance." She didn't mention the argument she'd had with her financial advisor that morning, or the second mortgage she'd quietly taken out on her home to cover her dwindling resources. As Eleanor left, Marcus Green arrived for his daily update for the newspaper. What had started as a simple human interest story had evolved into a daily column, Max's Journey. The Pine Ridge Gazette had seen its subscription numbers rise as people from neighboring towns began following the German Shepherd's recovery. "Any changes today?" Marcus asked, notebook in hand. At 40, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses he constantly misplaced, Marcus had the rumpled look of a man who lived through words rather than appearances. James filled him in on the day's small victories, the spoonful of food, the slight wag of the tail, the improved blood work. As they talked, Kyle entered carrying a bulky package. "Special delivery," Kyle announced, setting the box down carefully. "The hydrotherapy tub from that veterinary rehabilitation center in Fort Collins. They're donating it for Max's recovery." Dr. Mitchell emerged from her office, eyes widening at the sight of the equipment. "That's a $12,000 unit," she said, incredulous. "They're just giving it to us?" Kyle shrugged. "The director there saw the story on the news. Said any dog that survives a 200-foot fall deserves the best rehabilitation equipment available." As the men unpacked the portable therapy tub, Dr. Mitchell pulled Marcus aside, her voice low. "The publicity is helping, but I need you to understand something. Max's recovery won't be a straight line. There will be setbacks, possibly serious ones." Marcus nodded soberly. "I understand. I'm not looking to sensationalize this." "Good," Dr. Mitchell said, "because while I believe in what we're doing, I don't want false hope out there. The next few weeks will be critical." On day 12, Dr. Mitchell began physical therapy sessions with Max. With James at the head of the treatment table, gently holding Max's head and speaking reassuringly, the veterinarian carefully extended and flexed each of the dog's limbs, assessing muscle tone and joint mobility. "The good news is there's no muscle atrophy yet," she explained as she worked. "The electrical stimulation treatments we've been doing have helped maintain his muscle mass even while he's been immobile." James watched with a mixture of hope and heartache as Max whined softly during the manipulation of his injured leg. "Is he in pain?" "Some discomfort, yes," Dr. Mitchell admitted, "but the pain medication should be keeping it manageable. This is necessary, James. Without movement, his joints will stiffen permanently." That night, alone with Max in the dimly lit recovery room, James spoke to his dog about Martha. It had become a nightly ritual. These one-sided conversations that somehow made both her absence and Max's silent presence more bearable. "She always said you were the best anniversary gift I ever gave her," James murmured, his calloused fingers gently scratching behind Mac's ear. "Remember how you used to sleep on her feet while she read? She complained that you made her legs fall asleep, but she never made you move." Max's eyes, now more alert than they'd been in days, remained fixed on James's face. "I talk to her, you know, every day. But it's not the same without you there." James's voice cracked. "We need to get you home, buddy. The house is too quiet without you." As if understanding, Max lifted his head slightly, the first voluntary movement of such magnitude since the fall, and rested his muzzle against James's hand. Outside the clinic, the community of Pine Ridge continued its complicated relationship with Mac's story. A donation jar at the Main Street Diner had collected over $3,000 in spare change and small bills. The elementary school had organized a Get Well Max card-making project, resulting in dozens of colorful crayon-illustrated cards taped to the walls of Max's recovery area. But there were dissenters, too. Letters to the editor questioned the resources being devoted to one animal. An anonymous caller to the local radio station's community forum suggested that the money could better serve the Children's Hospital in Denver. The town council remained divided on the issue of municipal support. Frank Peterson, the hardware store owner who had initially scoffed at the expense of Max's care, found himself in a heated argument with a customer who shared his original view. "It's just fiscal responsibility," the customer insisted, counting change for a box of nails. "A dog's a dog. When it's time, it's time." Frank frowned, surprising himself with his response. "That particular dog pulled Mabel Tennyson out of her apartment when the gas line leaked last winter, my sister-in-law. Doctor said 5 more minutes in that gas and she'd have been brain damaged or dead." He pushed the man's change across the counter with unnecessary force. "Sometimes value ain't just about dollars and cents." On day 14, a box arrived from a veterinary orthotics company in California. A custom-fitted harness and wheeled cart designed to support Max's back end once he was strong enough to attempt standing. "It's too soon for this," Dr. Mitchell cautioned as Kyle helped her assemble the device. "But it's good to have it ready. His spine is healing better than I expected." The real surprise came later that afternoon. James was sitting on the floor beside Max's kennel, reading aloud from the sports section of the newspaper, another daily ritual. When Max's ears suddenly perked forward, the dog's nostrils flared and he made a soft whuffing sound. A moment later, the clinic door opened and Kyle walked in, carrying a paper bag that emanated the unmistakable aroma of hamburgers. "Thought you could use some real food," Kyle said to James, then froze as he noticed Mac's alert posture. "Is he—" James was staring at his dog in wonder. "He heard you before you came in. He smelled the food." Dr. Mitchell, summoned by the commotion, conducted a quick neurological assessment, moving her finger in front of Max's eyes, checking his pupillary response. "Cognitive function appears intact," she said, a rare smile breaking through her professional demeanor. He recognized Kyle's footsteps or scent, associated it with food. "That's complex neurological processing." The moment transformed the atmosphere of the clinic. For the first time, the recovery they'd been fighting for seemed possible rather than theoretical. That evening, as James took a rare break to shower and change clothes at Kyle's apartment, Dr. Mitchell sat beside Max's kennel, reviewing his chart. "You're quite the fighter," she told the German shepherd, who watched her with alert, intelligent eyes. "Statistically speaking, you shouldn't be alive." She reached through the kennel bars to check the bandage on his leg, and Max gently licked her hand, the first voluntary affection he'd shown to anyone besides James. Dr. Mitchell cleared her throat, blinking rapidly. "Well, good to see your personality intact, too." As the third week of Max's recovery began, Dr. Mitchell introduced a new element to his treatment plan: hydrotherapy. The specialized tub donated by the Fort Collins Center allowed Max to be suspended in warm water, his weight supported while he attempted to move his legs. Water therapy provides resistance without impact, she explained to James, Kyle, and Eleanor, who had all gathered to observe the first session. It will help rebuild muscle without putting stress on the healing bones. Max seemed uncertain as the team carefully lifted him into the tub, securing him in the supportive harness, but as the warm water rose around his body, a remarkable transformation occurred. His tail, which had barely managed weak thumps on dry land, began to wave more vigorously in the water. "He feels the buoyancy," Dr. Mitchell explained, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "The water is taking the weight off his injured spine and legs." James leaned close to the tub, his weathered face breaking into the first genuine smile anyone had seen in weeks. "Look at you, swimming like a fish. Martha would never believe it. You used to hate your baths." For 10 minutes, Max moved his legs through the water, small, hesitant paddling motions that nonetheless represented a massive improvement. By the end of the session, he was visibly tired but alert, his eyes brighter than they'd been since the accident. The day's success brought more media attention. A television crew from Denver arrived to film a segment on Max's recovery, interviewing Dr. Mitchell about the innovative techniques being used. The story aired on the evening news, prompting a flood of online donations to the fund Kyle had established to defray costs not covered by Eleanor's contributions. Eleanor herself was facing a reckoning. That morning, her financial advisor had been blunt. She had liquidated nearly all her accessible assets. The truth was that Barron's extended illness had already depleted much of her savings before Max's situation arose. The facade of wealth she maintained, the country club membership, the weekly hair appointments, the luxury car, masked a rapidly deteriorating financial reality. "Mrs. Daniels, I have to strongly advise against any further charitable contributions at this time," the advisor had said, his concern evident even over the phone. "Your property taxes are coming due next month, and there's the matter of your daughter's tuition payment." Eleanor had ended the call without making any promises. Her daughter Lisa, completing her medical residency in Boston, knew nothing of the financial strain. Eleanor intended to keep it that way. She would find a way to make everything work. She always did. Meanwhile, James was finding unexpected purpose in helping with Max's care. Dr. Mitchell had taught him how to perform the simple range of motion exercises that kept Max's joints flexible. James approached these sessions with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him an excellent police officer. "That's perfect," Dr. Mitchell said, observing as James gently flexed and extended Max's front paw. "You're a natural at this." James shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "Just following your instructions." "Not everyone can. You have good hands, patient ones." She hesitated. "Have you ever thought about volunteer work with service animals? The training center in Denver is always looking for people with your kind of experience and temperament." The question caught James off guard. Since retirement, since Martha's death, he hadn't thought much about the future at all. Each day had simply been a matter of getting through, of surviving until bedtime. The idea of purpose, of something to look forward to, felt almost foreign. "I'll think about it," he said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. By the end of the 3rd week, Max was attempting to pull himself forward with his front legs during his therapy sessions. The motion was labored, his back end still largely immobile, but it represented remarkable progress. Dr. Mitchell began using the wheeled cart during short, supervised periods, supporting Max's hindquarters while he practiced bearing weight on his front legs. The sight of Max, once the epitome of canine athleticism, struggling to drag himself forward with a wheeled apparatus supporting his back legs, brought tears to the eyes of everyone who witnessed it. But there was no self-pity in the German Shepherd's determined efforts. only the same steadfast courage that had once led him through floodwaters to find Kyle. "He's going to walk again," James said with quiet certainty as he watched Max complete a lap around the clinic's rear garden, the evening sun casting long shadows across the grass. "Maybe not like before, but he's going to walk." Dr. Mitchell, standing beside him, didn't contradict him. "His progress is remarkable. But James," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "even best-case scenario, Max will likely have permanent limitations. He won't be the same dog who hiked mountain trails with you." James nodded, his eyes never leaving Max. "None of us stay the same, Doc. Martha used to say that was the point of living, to let experience change you, make you more than you were." He smiled faintly. "Max and I will figure out our new normal together." As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting the valley in soft purple twilight, no one present could have predicted the crisis that lay just days ahead. A setback that would test their collective resolve and force each of them to confront difficult truths about what they were truly fighting for. The 25th day dawned with tentative sunshine filtering through the clinic blinds. James awoke on his cot, momentarily disoriented until the now familiar sounds of the monitoring equipment brought him back to reality. He rolled to his side, expecting to see Max still sleeping, but instead found the German Shepherd awake and alert, brown eyes fixed on him with unmistakable recognition. "Morning, buddy," James said softly, swinging his legs over the edge of the cot. His back protested. At 65, sleeping on a camp bed for weeks had taken its toll, but the discomfort vanished when Max responded with a deliberate thump of his tail against the blanket. "Exercise." Dr. Mitchell arrived an hour later, dark circles under her eyes betraying the late night she'd spent reviewing Max's latest test results. "I think we're ready to try something today," she announced after her morning examination. "His muscle tone has improved significantly after the hydrotherapy sessions. I'd like to see if he can attempt standing, with support, of course." The next hour transformed the quiet back room into a hive of activity. Kyle arrived with coffee and donuts, staying to help position the specialized harness. Eleanor appeared shortly after, impeccably dressed as always, though only she knew she'd sold her grandmother's sapphire earrings the previous day to maintain the illusion of financial stability. "All right, Max," Dr. Mitchell said, her tone professional but gentle as they secured the supportive harness around his body. "We're going to help you up, but you need to tell us if it's too much." With painstaking care, the team lifted Max using the harness straps, gradually transferring weight to his legs while keeping most of it supported. James knelt at eye level with his dog, murmuring encouragement. "Just like our morning stretches before a run, remember? Nice and easy." For a tense moment, Max hung limply in the harness, his injured leg carefully protected, the others seemingly unwilling to engage. Dr. Mitchell exchanged a concerned glance with Kyle, who adjusted his grip on the support straps. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, Max's front leg straightened. His right hind leg, the uninjured one, twitched, then pushed downward with visible effort. Though the harness still bore most of his weight, Max was undeniably attempting to stand. The room collectively held its breath. James, still at eye level with Max, saw something flicker across his dog's face. Determination, perhaps, or the simple instinct of an animal designed to stand on 4 legs rather than hang suspended. With trembling effort, Max managed to support a fraction of his own weight for nearly 10 seconds before his strength gave out. The team carefully lowered him back to his bedding, but the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally changed. What had been cautious hope crystallized into something more substantial. "He did it," Kyle said, grinning widely. "Did you see that? He actually stood." Dr. Mitchell maintained her professional reserve, but her eyes shone. "It's a promising first attempt. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but this is definitely encouraging." The news spread quickly through Pine Ridge. By lunchtime, a small crowd had gathered outside the clinic. held back by makeshift barriers Kyle had erected to maintain Max's peaceful recovery environment. Marcus Green was there, interviewing onlookers for a special edition of the Gazette. What no one knew was that as the crowd celebrated outside, Eleanor Daniels sat in her parked Mercedes around the corner, clutching an envelope containing a notice of foreclosure proceedings on her family home. 3 generations of Daniels had lived in the sprawling Victorian on Hillcrest Drive. Now, because of her choice to fund Max's treatment rather than meet her mortgage obligations, she stood to lose it all. Eleanor pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, a gesture of vulnerability no one in Pine Ridge had ever witnessed from the proud widow. "Worth it," she whispered to herself. "Some things matter more than houses." That afternoon, an unmarked delivery truck arrived at the clinic. The driver carried in a large package addressed to Dr. Mitchell, who opened it with growing amazement. "It's a custom-designed underwater treadmill," she explained to James as they unpacked the sophisticated equipment. "The latest technology in canine rehabilitation. There's only a handful of these in private practices across the country." Attached was a note from a veterinary rehabilitation specialist at Colorado State University. "Saw Max's story on the news. This was destined for our teaching hospital, but your patient needs it more urgently. Consider it a long-term loan. Keep showing the world what's possible." The arrival of the specialized equipment coincided with another development. Dr. Abigail Torres, a leading veterinary neurologist from Chicago, called Dr. Mitchell after watching a news segment about Max. "I've been following your case with interest," Dr. Torres said during their video consultation that evening. "The spinal recovery you're seeing defies conventional prognosis for that degree of trauma. I'd like to propose an experimental treatment protocol that's shown promising results in similar cases." Dr. Mitchell listened intently as her colleague outlined a combination of stem cell therapy and specialized electrical stimulation designed to enhance nerve regeneration. The treatment was cutting edge, not yet widely available, and exceptionally expensive. "I could fly out next week," Dr. Torres offered, "bring the necessary equipment and supplies. But I have to be candid. While I've seen remarkable results, this is still classified as experimental therapy." After ending the call, Dr. Mitchell found James in the garden with Max, who was resting in the afternoon sunshine, his head on James's lap. "We have an opportunity," she began cautiously. "A new treatment that might accelerate Max's nerve recovery, potentially giving him much better function in his injured leg." She outlined Dr. Torres's proposal, careful not to overstate the potential benefits. "The issue is cost. Even with Dr. Torres donating her time, the procedure and materials would run about $30,000. James's expression didn't change, but his hand stilled on Max's fur. "I've already put the house on the market. The realtor says it should sell quickly, even in this condition. Once it closes—" "That will take too long," Dr. Mitchell interrupted gently. "The optimal window for this treatment is now, while he's showing active nerve regeneration." Before James could respond, Eleanor appeared at the garden gate, having overheard the conversation. "I'll cover it," she said simply. Dr. Mitchell shook her head. "Eleanor, you've already contributed so much. This would be—" "My decision," Eleanor finished firmly. "I'll have the funds transferred tomorrow morning." What no one knew, not even Eleanor herself, was that the source of the mysterious funding was about to be revealed. Earlier that day, a bank manager in Denver had been reviewing Eleanor's depleted accounts with growing concern, eventually feeling ethically obligated to contact her daughter Lisa in Boston. That evening, as the clinic closed to visitors, Dr. Mitchell gathered her staff for a detailed planning session regarding the experimental treatment. Kyle volunteered to convert the clinic's rear storage room into a sterile treatment area to Dr. Torres's specifications. "We should probably let people know what's happening," the technician suggested. "There's about 50 people who show up daily just to check on Max's progress." Dr. Mitchell nodded. I'll ask Marcus to put something in the paper, but I want to manage expectations. This isn't a miracle cure." As the meeting concluded, James stepped outside for a rare moment alone. The evening air carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains where this ordeal had begun nearly a month earlier. He looked up at the stars, bright in the clear mountain sky. "Wish you were here, Martha," he whispered. "You always knew what to do in a crisis." He smiled slightly, imagining her practical response. She'd have organized a fundraiser, enlisted volunteers, kept meticulous records of Max's medication schedule. A soft voice interrupted his reverie. "Mr. Wilson." James turned to find a young woman approaching, mid-30s, with Eleanor's aristocratic features softened by a more contemporary style. She carried an overnight bag and looked exhausted. "I'm Lisa Daniels," she said, extending her hand. "Eleanor's daughter. I just flew in from Boston." James shook her hand, confusion evident on his face. "I didn't know Eleanor had called you." "She didn't," Lisa replied, her expression troubled. "The bank did. My mother is on the verge of financial ruin, Mr. Wilson. She's liquidated nearly everything she owns to pay for your dog's treatment." The revelation hit James like a physical blow. "That can't be right. Eleanor is—" "Very good at maintaining appearances," Lisa finished. "She always has been. The reality is that my father's insurance business has been failing for years. His medical bills ate through most of their savings before he died. Then her own dog's illness last year." She sighed. "The point is, she can't afford this experimental treatment she just committed to." James felt sick. "I had no idea." "She never said anything." "She wouldn't," Lisa said, a hint of affectionate exasperation in her voice. "Pride runs deep in my family." Before James could respond, Dr. Mitchell burst through the clinic doors, her usual composure shattered. "James, get in here quickly." The calm, methodical progress of the past few days exploded into frantic activity. Max, who had been stable throughout the afternoon, suddenly experienced a seizure while resting in his kennel. By the time James rushed to his side, the German Shepherd was rigid, his breathing labored, heart rate. "What's happening?" James demanded, watching helplessly as Dr. Mitchell and her team worked to stabilize Max. "His temperature is spiking," the veterinarian replied tersely, administering an injection with practiced precision. 105.2 and climbing. Possible infection, though I don't know the source yet." The next hours passed in a blur of urgent medical intervention. Blood samples were drawn and rushed to the all-night laboratory in Denver. Cooling blankets were applied to Max's overheated body. Intravenous antibiotics flowed through his veins as Dr. Mitchell fought an enemy she couldn't yet identify. By midnight, a small vigil had formed outside the clinic. Word of Max's crisis spread through Pine Ridge with the efficiency only possible in a small town. Kyle stood at the perimeter, updating the gathered crowd in hushed tones. Eleanor and Lisa joined them, mother and daughter standing side by side, their earlier confrontation about finances temporarily set aside. Inside, James refused to leave Max's side, even when Dr. Mitchell gently suggested he get some rest. "I wasn't there when he fell," James said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not leaving him now." Around 2 a.m., the laboratory called with preliminary results. Dr. Mitchell listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grave. "Systemic infection," she explained to James after ending the call. "Highly resistant bacteria. We're going to need specialized antibiotics, and quickly." The nearest veterinary pharmacy with the necessary medication was in Denver, a 90-minute drive each way. Kyle immediately volunteered, taking the clinic's pickup truck and departing into the night, driving through intermittent mountain rain showers with grim determination. As dawn broke over Pine Ridge, Max's condition remained precarious. His fever had plateaued but not decreased, and his breathing grew increasingly labored. Dr. Mitchell maintained a professional demeanor, but James could read the concern in her eyes. "He was doing so well," James said, his voice hollow. "How could this happen so suddenly?" Dr. Mitchell checked the IV line, adjusting the flow rate slightly. Sometimes in severe trauma cases, the body's resources get depleted fighting the initial injuries. Makes them vulnerable to opportunistic infections. She placed a hand on James's shoulder. He's still fighting, James. Don't give up yet. Outside, the impromptu vigil had grown. Someone had started a prayer circle. Others brought coffee and breakfast for those who'd stayed through the night. Frank Peterson arrived with folding chairs from his hardware store. The town pastor spoke quietly with Eleanor and Lisa. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the clinic parking lot. Inside, machines beeped, medication dripped, and Max's labored breathing filled the quiet room. The progress of weeks hung in precarious balance, threatened by microscopic invaders that had found their way into the bloodstream of a dog who had already survived the impossible. Kyle's return with the specialized antibiotics brought a momentary surge of hope. Dr. Mitchell administered the medication immediately, her movements precise despite her exhaustion. "Now we wait," she told James, checking Mac's vital signs once more. "The next 12 hours will tell us a lot." As the clinic entered its second day of crisis, the emotional toll became increasingly evident. Staff took shifts to maintain round-the-clock care. James refused to leave, dozing fitfully in a chair pulled close to Max's kennel. Dr. Mitchell reviewed every aspect of Max's treatment plan, searching for anything she might have missed. The community of Pine Ridge, so divided when Mac's journey began, now seemed unified in their vigil. The local diner sent over meals. The elementary school children created a massive Get Well banner that Kyle hung across the front of the clinic. Even Frank Peterson, once skeptical of the resources devoted to a dog, stood vigil for hours, his weathered face solemn with concern. What none of them yet knew was that this crisis would ultimately reveal both a shocking truth about Max's fall and an unexpected path forward for everyone involved in his remarkable journey. The 35th day dawned gray and somber, the weather matching the mood inside Dr. Mitchell's clinic. Max's condition had stabilized somewhat, his fever reduced from dangerous to concerning, but the infection continued to rage through his system despite the specialized antibiotics. The German Shepherd lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest, his eyes closed, unresponsive to James's voice for the first time since the early days after his fall. Dr. Mitchell emerged from her office, where she'd been consulting via video call with specialists from Colorado State University's veterinary hospital. The lines of fatigue etched into her face had deepened, and she carried a tablet displaying Max's latest test results. "James," she said quietly, gesturing toward the small break room, "I need to speak with you." James knew that tone. He'd used it himself years ago as a police officer when delivering the worst kind of news to families. He followed Dr. Mitchell, his legs leaden, mentally preparing himself for what was coming. "The infection is resistant to the strongest antibiotics we have available," Dr. Mitchell began, her clinical tone barely masking her personal distress. "The fever is causing systemic stress on organs that were already compromised by the fall. His kidney values are climbing, and there are indications of liver involvement." James stared at the linoleum floor. "What are you saying exactly?" Dr. Mitchell took a deep breath. "I'm saying that despite everything we've done, everything Eleanor has funded, everything the community has contributed, we're losing ground, and Max is suffering." The words hung in the air between them, their implications crystal clear. James closed his eyes briefly, his weathered face a mask of contained anguish. "You want to put him down?" he said, not a question but a statement. "I want you to consider it," Dr. Mitchell corrected gently. "As his veterinarian, I'm obligated to discuss all options. As someone who's come to care about both of you, I can't watch him suffer indefinitely with no realistic hope of recovery." James stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "No? He survived a 200-foot fall. He survived surgeries and broken bones. He was standing just a few days ago. Max doesn't quit, and neither do I." Dr. Mitchell didn't argue, but her expression was heavy with the burden of medical knowledge James didn't possess, the understanding of how quickly sepsis could overtake even the strongest body, how organs shut down in cascading failure, how suffering could escalate beyond what medications could control. Word of Max's deteriorating condition spread quickly through Pine Ridge. The vigil outside the clinic grew, but the atmosphere had changed from hopeful to somber. Conversations were hushed, expressions grim. Marcus Green from the Gazette arrived, notepad in hand, but for once seemed at a loss for words as Kyle updated him on Max's condition. Eleanor and Lisa Daniels sat together on a bench outside the clinic, their personal financial drama temporarily overshadowed by the crisis within. The mother-daughter confrontation about Eleanor's financial decisions had given way to reluctant respect on Lisa's part for the depth of her mother's commitment. "I still think you were reckless," Lisa said quietly, "but I understand why." Eleanor patted her daughter's hand. "Some debts can't be calculated in dollars, dear. That dog saved Martha Wilson, even though she ultimately passed. I couldn't save him then, but perhaps—" Her voice faltered. Inside, James sat beside Max's kennel, one hand resting gently on the dog's head. His voice was low and steady as he spoke, not knowing if Max could hear him, but needing to speak nonetheless. "Remember that winter rescue, buddy? The hikers trapped in that blizzard on Baker Ridge? Everyone said it was too dangerous to send in a team, but you kept pulling on the leash, like you knew exactly where they were." James smiled faintly at the memory. 12 hours in that storm. My feet were so frostbitten I couldn't feel them for days, but you never hesitated, never looked back to see if I was following. You just knew what needed to be done. Max lay unmoving except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "I need that courage now, Max," James continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I need to know what's right. For you, not for me." He closed his eyes, the weight of the impending decision crushing him more thoroughly than age or grief ever had. Dr. Mitchell approached quietly, a syringe in hand. "Pain medication," she explained, noting James's wary glance. "Nothing more. I promised we would keep him comfortable, whatever you decide." As she administered the injection, Max's eyelids fluttered briefly. For a moment, the familiar brown eyes opened, cloudy with fever and medication, but unmistakably aware. They fixed on James with what seemed like recognition, then slowly closed again. That brief connection shattered James's composure. His shoulders slumped, and tears he had been holding back for days finally broke free, running silently down his weathered cheeks. "It can't keep him suffering because I'm not ready to say goodbye," he said, his voice barely audible. "Martha would never forgive me for that." Dr. Mitchell placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to decide this moment. Let's give the medications a little more time." But time was becoming the enemy rather than the ally it had been throughout Max's recovery. By evening, his breathing had become more labored, his temperature climbing once again despite the cooling measures being employed. The monitoring equipment beeped with increasing frequency as his vital signs fluctuated in concerning patterns. Kyle entered the clinic after dark, having spent hours managing the growing crowd of community members outside. He found James still sitting beside Max's kennel, looking older than Kyle had ever seen him. "People are asking what they can do," Kyle said awkwardly. "Everyone wants to help somehow." James shook his head wearily. "Unless someone out there has a miracle cure for antibiotic-resistant infections, there's nothing to be done." Kyle hesitated, then pulled a folding chair beside James. "You know, when Max found me during that flood, I was ready to give up. The water was rising, my leg was trapped. I'd made peace with dying there." He stared at his hands. "But then there was this bark, this insistent, stubborn bark that wouldn't stop. and I realized I had to keep fighting because this damn dog wasn't about to let me surrender." James managed a ghost of a smile. "Sounds like Max." "The point is," Kyle continued, "sometimes the fight is worth it, even when the odds are impossible. But sometimes," he glanced at Max's labored breathing, "sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to stop fighting." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Before James could respond, Dr. Mitchell rushed in, phone in hand, her expression tense. "The lab in Denver just called. They found something unusual in Max's latest blood work." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There are traces of a compound that shouldn't be there. Something not from any medication we've given him." James straightened. "What does that mean?" "It means his infection might not be a coincidence or a complication." Dr. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "It could be the result of poisoning. Low level, slow acting, toxic exposure." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt, temporarily pushing back the fog of grief and resignation. "Poisoning? How is that possible?" Dr. Mitchell shook her head. "I don't know. I've sent the samples for more comprehensive testing, but it could explain why he's not responding to treatment as expected. We're not just fighting an infection, we're fighting whatever toxic substance is in his system." Kyle stood abruptly. "I need to make a call." As he stepped outside, the clinic door opened to admit Marcus Green, who had clearly been waiting for an opportunity to speak privately with James. The journalist looked uncharacteristically agitated, his normally methodical demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. "Mr. Wilson," he said, lowering his voice as he approached, "I think I've found something you need to see." From his messenger bag, Marcus produced a laptop and opened it to reveal a series of grainy photographs. These were taken by a wildlife conservation photographer who was documenting bighorn sheep in the canyon area the day before Max's fall. James leaned forward, squinting at the images. They showed a distant section of the cliff face where Max had fallen, and with some effort James could make out two figures on the trail. Figures that appeared to be carrying long equipment cases. "I don't understand," James said. "What am I looking at?" "Poachers," Marcus said grimly. "I've been investigating reports of illegal trophy hunting in the national forest lands. These men were using restricted areas to hunt bighorn sheep out of season. The photographer reported them to the Forest Service, but didn't realize what he'd captured until I started asking questions about activity in that area around the time of Max's accident." The implication slowly dawned on James, a cold fury replacing his despair. "You think they had something to do with Max's fall? That it wasn't an accident?" Marcus nodded. "I think Max might have encountered them on the trail, and a trained search and rescue dog would be a serious threat to illegal hunters. He could track them, expose their operation." Dr. Mitchell joined them, her medical mind quickly connecting the dots. If they used poison bait to incapacitate Max before he fell, or perhaps pushed him, it could explain the compounds we're finding in his bloodstream now. The toxin might have remained dormant in his tissues, only leaching into his system as he began to recover. The revelation transformed the atmosphere in the clinic. What had been a losing battle against cruel fate suddenly became something else entirely. A fight for justice, a refusal to let deliberate cruelty triumph. James stood slowly, decades of police work reawakening in his bearing. "We need to confirm this, and if it's true, we need to find them." Outside, unaware of the discovery, the community of Pine Ridge maintained their vigil as night fell. Eleanor sat with Lisa, both women exhausted but unwilling to leave. Frank Peterson distributed coffee from large thermoses, his earlier skepticism long forgotten. Children placed drawings and stuffed animals at a makeshift memorial, their young faces solemn with the gravity of impending loss. None of them yet knew that the story of Max, his fall, his remarkable survival, and his current crisis was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would transform their vigil from a death watch to something altogether different. Day 36 dawned with a renewed sense of purpose at Dr. Mitchell's clinic. The previous night's revelations had transformed what had been a losing battle against infection into a focused investigation with two parallel tracks, saving Max and finding those responsible for his fall. Sheriff Tom Reynolds, a longtime colleague of James from his police days, arrived early in the morning. At 62, with thinning gray hair and the slight paunch of a man who'd spent too many years behind a desk, he still carried himself with the authority earned through decades of law enforcement. "I pulled the Forest Service reports from the dates around Max's fall," the sheriff said, spreading documents across the clinic's break room table. "They did follow up on that photographer's complaint about possible poachers, but found nothing conclusive, just some tire tracks and a makeshift camp that had been hastily abandoned." James examined the photographs Marcus had provided, his trained eye picking out details others might miss. These men knew the area well. They chose a remote section, avoided the main trails. His finger traced the outline of the equipment cases. "Those aren't standard hunting gear, too long, too narrow." "Custom rifle cases," Sheriff Reynolds agreed. "Probably for high-powered scopes and silencers, the kind of setup illegal trophy hunters use." Dr. Mitchell joined them, looking exhausted but determined after a night spent researching toxins with veterinary poison control specialists. "The lab identified the compound in Max's blood," she reported. "It's a derivative of a pesticide that's heavily restricted, used primarily in certain countries for predator control. Small doses cause disorientation and weakness in canines. Larger doses are fatal." The pieces were falling into place with grim clarity. James's expression hardened as he considered the scenario. Max encountering poachers on the trail, the men recognizing the threat a trained search dog posed to their operation, using poisoned bait to incapacitate him, then ensuring his silence by pushing him from the cliff. "They never expected him to survive the fall," James said quietly. "They thought they'd eliminated the problem." Sheriff Reynolds nodded. "We've had reports of similar poaching activities in neighboring counties. It's a lucrative business, selling trophy hunts to wealthy clients who don't want to bother with permits or seasonal restrictions." "So how do we find them?" Kyle asked, having joined the impromptu investigation after completing Max's morning care routine. "We start with this," Marcus said, pulling out another photo. This one showing a partial license plate on a truck partially visible through the trees near the cliff trail. "I enhanced it as much as possible. We have the first 3 characters." Sheriff Reynolds took the image. "I'll run it through the system, cross-referencing with known poaching suspects." As the men planned their investigation, Eleanor and Lisa Daniels arrived with breakfast for the clinic staff. The strain between mother and daughter had eased somewhat, though the fundamental issue of Eleanor's finances remained unresolved. "How is he this morning?" Eleanor asked, setting down bags of still-warm pastries from the local bakery. Dr. Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "Stable. The identification of the toxin gives us a treatment path we didn't have before. I've started him on a specific binding agent that should help clear the poison from his system." "Will it be enough?" Lisa asked, the medical professional in her recognizing the guarded optimism in Dr. Mitchell's tone. "It should help. But his system has been compromised for weeks. The cumulative damage—" She left the sentence unfinished. Outside, the community vigil continued, though the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Word had spread about the poaching investigation, transforming the narrative from a tragic accident to a deliberate act of cruelty. The mood was now tinged with anger alongside concern, the collective empathy of Pine Ridge finding a new focus. Frank Peterson, normally reserved, spoke passionately to a small group gathered near his hardware store. 30 years I've lived here, and we've always had respect for the natural order of things. You hunt in season with proper permits. You don't poison animals. You don't destroy what makes these mountains special." By mid-afternoon, Sheriff Reynolds returned to the clinic with promising news. The partial license plate, combined with recent wildlife enforcement reports, had yielded two potential suspects, brothers Carson and Wade Mercer, with multiple citations for hunting violations in 3 states. They operate a private hunting guide service that's been investigated twice for leading expeditions in restricted areas, the sheriff explained, showing their driver's license photos. No convictions so far. Witnesses tend to disappear or change their stories. James studied the images. 2 men in their 40s with the weathered complexions of those who spend their lives outdoors. Something about Wade Mercer's eyes triggered a memory. I've encountered him before, James realized. Maybe 5 years ago. Martha and I were hiking with Max near Crystal Creek. We came across a campsite that seemed off too well hidden. Too much high-end gear for typical backpackers. Max started acting strangely around their camp perimeter. When they spotted us, one of the men was particularly hostile. Made comments about nosy dogs getting into trouble. Sheriff Reynolds made a note. Their registered business address is about 60 miles from here. I'll get a warrant to search the property. While the investigation accelerated, Dr. Mitchell focused on Max's treatment with renewed determination. The binding agent designed to neutralize the toxin was administered hourly through his IV, along with supportive medications for his struggling kidneys and liver. By evening, there were subtle but encouraging signs of improvement. Max's fever decreased by 0.5 degree. His oxygen levels stabilized. Most significantly, when James spoke to him during one of his brief periods of consciousness, Max's tail moved in weak acknowledgement. "He knows you're here," Dr. Mitchell said, checking the monitors. "That's a good sign." James nodded, throat too tight for words. The confirmation that Max's fall had been deliberate, that someone had intentionally harmed his loyal companion, had awakened a cold fury in him, but also a renewed determination. This wasn't just about saving Max anymore. It was about justice. As night fell, an unexpected visitor arrived at the clinic. Thomas Blackwood, a representative from the Tribal Wildlife Authority of the nearby reservation, came bearing information that proved crucial to the investigation. "Our conservation officers have been tracking illegal hunting activity on reservation land for months," Blackwood explained, spreading a map across the table. "We've documented kill sites here, here, and here, all consistent with the Mercers' operating pattern." He pointed to a location marked in red. 3 days ago, our trail cameras captured images of a vehicle matching the Mercers' truck entering this remote area. It's a known bighorn sheep calving ground, protected by both state and tribal regulations. Sheriff Reynolds studied the map. "That's less than 20 miles from here, if they're still in the area." "They likely are," Blackwood confirmed. "These trophy hunts usually last 4 to 5 days. Based on their pattern, they won't leave until their clients have their trophies." A plan quickly formed. Sheriff Reynolds would coordinate with tribal authorities for a joint operation at dawn. Given the Mercers' history of evading prosecution, the element of surprise was essential. The goal was to catch them in the act, with sufficient evidence to ensure conviction. As the men finalized details, Dr. Mitchell called James to Max's bedside. The German Shepherd's condition had improved enough that she had removed some of the supportive equipment, allowing him to lie more naturally. "I thought you'd want to see this," she said quietly. Max's eyes were open, clearer than they had been in days. Though still obviously weak, he was tracking movement, responding to sounds. When James knelt beside him, Max lifted his head slightly, recognition evident in his gaze. "Hey, buddy," James whispered, carefully stroking the fur between Max's ears. "We know what happened. We're going to make it right." Whether Max understood the words was impossible to know, but he seemed to respond to James's tone, to the resolution and purpose that had replaced despair. His tail moved against the blanket in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Outside, the community vigil had transformed into something approaching a rally. Kyle had shared the broad outlines of the investigation, careful not to compromise the planned operation, and the response was immediate. Residents who had never taken a position on Mac's treatment now spoke passionately about protecting wildlife and punishing those who had so callously harmed a dog who had served their community. Eleanor Daniels, watching the gathering from the clinic steps, felt a complex mix of emotions. The financial reality of her situation remained dire. Foreclosure proceedings were advancing, and her remaining assets wouldn't cover her obligations. Yet, seeing the community unite around a cause larger than one dog's survival gave her a sense of peace she hadn't expected. "It was worth it," she said softly to Lisa, who stood beside her. "Whatever happens." Lisa squeezed her mother's hand in silent understanding. The daughter who had flown in ready to lecture about financial responsibility now found herself moved by the deeper values at play: loyalty, justice, community. As midnight approached, final preparations were made for the dawn operation. James, despite Dr. Mitchell's concerns about his health after so many sleepless nights, insisted on joining the law enforcement team. "I was a K-9 officer for 15 years, he said simply. "I know how to approach armed suspects with minimal risk, and I need to be there. For Max." In his kennel, Max rested more peacefully than he had in days, the binding agent slowly clearing the poison from his system. Whether he would recover fully remained uncertain, but the immediate crisis had passed. Something had shifted in him, in his condition, in the community, in the story that had brought them all together. The 36th day was ending, but the most dramatic chapter of Max's journey was about to begin. Day 38 dawned clear and bright over Pine Ridge, a stark contrast to the turbulent days that had preceded it. The early morning light filtered through the blinds of Dr. Mitchell's clinic, casting warm stripes across the recovery area where Max rested. The German Shepherd lay on his special orthopedic bed, more alert than he had been in days, his eyes following movement with renewed awareness. James entered quietly, his face showing the mixture of exhaustion and triumph that had characterized the past 48 hours. The lines etched into his weathered face had deepened, but there was a lightness to his step that had been absent for weeks. "Morning, hero," he said softly, kneeling beside Max and gently stroking the dog's head. Max responded with a deliberate thump of his tail against the bedding. A simple gesture that nonetheless represented a victory against overwhelming odds. 2 days earlier, in the pre-dawn darkness of day 36, James had joined Sheriff Reynolds and a joint task force of local and tribal officers as they closed in on the Mercer brothers' illegal hunting operation. The raid had been executed with precision, catching the poachers and their wealthy clients in the act of tracking a protected bighorn sheep herd. The evidence recovered from the Mercer's vehicle and temporary camp had been damning. Not only the specialized hunting equipment and unregistered firearms, but a supply of the very toxin found in Max's bloodstream. Most crucially, they discovered a digital camera containing photos of various trophies, including an image that made James' blood run cold. Wade Mercer, standing triumphantly at the edge of the cliff where Max had fallen, pointing down into the canyon below. The subsequent interrogation had revealed the full story. The Mercers had encountered James and Max during a scouting trip for their illegal hunt. Recognizing Max as a trained search dog from their previous encounter years earlier, they became concerned he would detect evidence of their poaching activities. After James and Max became separated during the storm, Wade had spotted Max alone on the trail. He'd first attempted to lure the dog away with poisoned bait, then, when Max showed signs of the toxin but didn't fully succumb, physically forced him off the cliff edge, assuming the fall would be fatal. "Your dog was smart," Carson Mercer had eventually admitted during questioning. "Wouldn't take the bait directly, just sniffed it, got disoriented." Wade panicked. "Thought the dog would lead rangers back to our hunting grounds." The confession, combined with the physical evidence, ensured the brothers would face not only multiple wildlife violations, but animal cruelty charges and attempted evidence tampering charges. That from Casey and carried significant prison time. The DA says it's an airtight case, Sheriff Reynolds had told James the previous evening. Those photos were their trophies, but they're going to be our evidence. Now, as James sat beside Max in the quiet morning light, the resolution of the criminal case felt secondary to the miracle unfolding before him. For the first time since his treatment for the toxin began, Max was showing interest in food, accepting small pieces of chicken from James's hand with cautious enthusiasm. Dr. Mitchell entered, clipboard in hand, her professional demeanor softened by the hint of a smile. "His blood work from last night shows dramatic improvement," she reported. "Kidney and liver values still elevated, but trending in the right direction, and the fever's completely gone." "What about the spine and leg injuries?" James asked, the question he'd been afraid to voice during the crisis of infection. Dr. Mitchell set down her clipboard and knelt beside them, carefully running her hands along Max's back and injured hind leg, noting his responses. "The forced rest during his illness actually gave the bones more time to heal. The neurological responses in the hind legs are stronger than I would have expected." She looked up at James, allowing cautious optimism to show. "I think it's time we try standing again." Within the hour, a small team had gathered for the attempt. Kyle brought the supportive harness they'd used before the infection crisis. Eleanor and Lisa Daniels arrived, having postponed their meeting with financial advisors to be present for this milestone. Even Marcus Green came, notebook in hand but setting it aside to help as needed. "All right, Max," Dr. Mitchell said as they carefully positioned the harness around his body. "Nice and slow, no pressure." With gentle, coordinated movements, the team lifted Max using the harness straps, gradually transferring weight to his legs while still providing support. James positioned himself at eye level with Max, offering quiet encouragement. For a tense moment, Max hung in the harness, his legs dangling uncertainly. Then, with visible determination, his front legs straightened and locked. His right hind leg, the uninjured one, found purchase on the floor. Most remarkably, his left hind leg, encased in the external fixator but healing better than anyone had dared hope, made a tentative effort to support weight. "That's it," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got it, buddy." The room collectively held its breath as Max stood, partially supported by the harness but undeniably bearing weight on all four legs for the first time since his fall. His body trembled with the effort, but his eyes remained fixed on James, drawing strength from the connection. 30 seconds, Dr. Mitchell murmured, watching the clock. "That's enough for today." They carefully lowered Max back to his bed, but the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally transformed. What had been cautious hope crystallized into joyful certainty. Max would recover. The road ahead would be long, with months of rehabilitation, but the worst was behind them. News of Max's breakthrough spread quickly through Pine Ridge. By midday, a celebration had spontaneously formed outside the clinic. Not a somber vigil this time, but a genuine festival of community spirit. Children made congratulatory posters. The local bakery donated a dog-friendly cake shaped like a bone. Even Frank Peterson closed his hardware store early to join the gathering. Inside, as Max rested from his exertion, the core group that had seen him through his darkest hours gathered in the clinic's break room. The conversation turned inevitably to what would come next. "The underwater treadmill therapy can begin next week," Dr. Mitchell explained, outlining the rehabilitation plan. "Daily physical therapy, gradually increasing duration. He'll need the supportive harness for several more weeks, but eventually we can transition to a less restrictive brace." "And long-term?" James asked, the question that had been weighing on him. Dr. Mitchell considered carefully before answering. "He'll have limitations. The spinal damage will likely mean some persistent weakness in the hind end. The injured leg will probably always have restricted range of motion." She paused, then added with quiet certainty, "But he'll walk. He'll have a good quality of life, different from before, but good." James nodded, accepting both the limitations and the promise. "That's all that matters." Eleanor, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. "I wanted everyone to know that I've made some decisions." She took a deep breath, her aristocratic bearing momentarily vulnerable. "I'm selling the house on Hillcrest Drive. It's too much for one person anyway. I found a lovely cottage in town that's much more practical." Lisa began to protest, but Eleanor raised a hand to silence her. "It's already done, dear. The papers were signed yesterday." She smiled, a genuine expression that softened the refined lines of her face. "And I've decided to use part of the proceeds to establish a fund for emergency veterinary care for working and service animals, the Max Wilson Fund." James looked up, clearly moved. "Eleanor, you don't have to—" "I want to," she interrupted firmly. "What happened here, what we all experienced together, it matters. It should continue." The conversation was interrupted by a soft whine from the recovery area. James hurried to Max's side, finding the German shepherd awake and alert, making clear his displeasure at being excluded from the gathering. "All right, demanding as always," James chuckled, carefully helping Max stand. With the supportive harness and James's steady hand, Max managed to walk the short distance to the break room, where he was welcomed with gentle pats and quiet words of encouragement. Looking around the room at the unlikely community that had formed around Max's struggle, the dedicated veterinarian who had defied medical odds, the wilderness guide whose life Max had once saved, the wealthy widow who had sacrificed her financial security, the journalist who had uncovered crucial evidence, the skeptical hardware store owner who had become a devoted supporter, James felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death: belonging. "I've been thinking," he said, his hand resting on Max's head. "Once he's stronger, Max would make a good therapy dog. Not search and rescue any more, those days are behind him, but visiting hospitals, nursing homes, maybe working with veterans dealing with PTSD. Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. His temperament would be perfect for it, and there's something powerful about a visibly recovered animal working with people facing their own rehabilitation journeys. "I could help with the training," Kyle offered. "My sister works with service dogs in Denver. She's always saying they need more handlers." The conversation flowed naturally from there, plans and possibilities extending beyond the immediate crisis that had brought them together. Outside, the community celebration continued, a testament to the ripple effects of one dog's remarkable journey and the human connections forged through shared purpose. As the afternoon sunlight slanted golden through the clinic windows, Max dozed off, surrounded by his newfound family, his body finally at rest in the certainty of safety and care. The journey that had begun 38 days earlier with a terrible fall had transformed not just one dog's life, but an entire community. A reminder that sometimes the deepest wounds, when healed together, create the strongest bonds. After all life has thrown at us, the careers we've built, the families we've raised, the losses we've endured, it's easy to believe our days of profound connection are behind us. Max's journey reminds us this simply isn't true. When that German shepherd fell from the cliff, he didn't just survive against impossible odds. He brought together a community that had forgotten how to unite. His struggle mirrors our own at this stage of life. Bodies that don't work quite like they used to, the dignity in adapting rather than surrendering, and the discovery that our value isn't diminished by our limitations. Remember James Wilson, who found purpose after devastating loss? Eleanor Daniels, who realized her legacy wasn't in possessions but in meaningful action? Like them, we stand at a crossroads, where wisdom meets opportunity. We know what truly matters now. We've weathered enough storms to recognize when to fight and when to accept. Mac's story speaks to that hard-earned wisdom and reminds us that even in our silver years, we can form connections that transform us. Even after terrible falls, literal or metaphorical, we can stand again, perhaps differently than before, but with a strength and purpose that only experience can provide. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.